Well, thank you all very much for joining us for, I believe this is the last talk of the day, and I'm personally really excited about it. We're going to be learning about RFID, how the Flipper Zero vulnerabilities work, and how to mitigate them, which, my background's in, hacker conferences. I got my start at DEF CON, so this is like the kind of conference talks I like to come for. So I think you're really in for a treat. My name's Maggie McAlpine. I'm with Sekion, and I have the very great privilege of introducing Bill and Eggy, who are from the Physical Security Village. So after the talk, be sure to stop by there too, and be sure to fill out the survey for the SOCs when this talk is over. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and please enjoy their talk.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. So this is the Flipper talk. So just to poll the audience, who has heard of the Flipper Zero before? All right, that's basically everyone. That's a good thing. And who has a Flipper Zero? Awesome. And who has used the Flipper Zero to clone a badge, do something like that, use it in a job? All right, awesome. Okay, so we have a few people. Hopefully, by the end of this talk, you all will have the information necessary to try out some of these things that we show you on stage. So just a quick disclaimer. This is for educational purposes. Don't do anything illegal with it, unethical with it, and RSA Conference does not necessarily endorse or agree with things that we say on stage. Also, just make sure to note that you might be recorded and published. Cool. OK, so RFID technologies are everywhere in our lives whenever we interact with a credit card terminal by tapping our card, or whenever we present our badge to get into work. We interact with these RFID technologies, but this interaction is kind of like a magic black box type of an interaction. You don't necessarily, when it's a key, you see that there's like some raised and lowered parts of the key, and you insert it and you can guess like, okay, yeah, it's measuring the key somehow. But with RFID, it kind of feels like magic. You present the card and it either lets you in or it doesn't. So in this talk, we're going to be learning how these various RFID technologies work, and how we can, the way I like to explain is how we can mess with these technologies using the Flipper Zero. Reminder though, this is an introductory talk, so if you're already a Flipper Zero master, this might be kind of review for you, but for those of you who haven't used the Flipper Zero before, or have just bought it and kind of don't know how to play around with it that much, this should be the talk for you.
Yeah, the other thing is we're keeping this talk to only things that are on the default Flipper firmware. So no nasty software upgrades before you can try this stuff.
All right, so quick outline of the talk. We're first going to talk about kind of the very basic physics behind it. Don't fall asleep just yet. And then we're going to be introducing the Flipper Zero, what we can do with the Flipper Zero, how we can do various brute force and privilege escalation exploits with it. And we're going to be looking into some other capabilities of the Flipper Zero. It's not only an RFID device. And then we're going to close up the talk by looking at some defenses against these. So be that NFC, and you can mess that up as well, but it's a more high security version of basic RFID, and how the mitigation works for this.
OK. So let's start from the ground up, building up what RFID is. And when we understand that term, we'll understand how we can hack it with the Flipper. So it's radio frequency identification. And the identification, let's focus on that for a moment. You're used to ID cards that you've got in your wallet to identify yourself and assert who you are. We're just doing that using RF. Another common form of ID is just a barcode. Right? So this is an example of a machine-readable identification. And to add the RF into it, one simple example is just saying on a walkie-talkie, "Hi, I'm Bill." That is technically RFID. I am using radio frequency to identify myself. Fundamentally, that's what's happening with an RFID tag as well. It is in a machine-readable format, though, so what it actually looks like is just screaming your name over and over into that walkie-talkie for whoever might be listening. And that's obviously not a very secure protocol, and we'll see how that impacts what the flipper can do to hack these systems. So just like a barcode reader scanning a barcode, that information is out there for everyone to see.
All right, now let's take a look at the radio frequency part of it a little bit. I'm not going to bore you too much, just kind of a quick physics primer. So something that we realized a while ago is if we have charged thingies move up and down, or just up or down in a wire, we have some electrical and magnetic fields around it. And these electrical and magnetic fields can induce charges to do weird things in other conductors. So what's basically happening with RFID is this. So if we take a look at the reader just has a coil of wire. And that coil of wire interacts with the coil of wire inside the RFID fob or card or badge or whatever. And these interact with each other a similar way to how a wireless charger might interact with a phone, right? So you don't need to change the battery in your badge or on your, like your toll transponder that you buy for a highway. The tag is powered by the reader. What the tag does differently in RFID case is it uses that electromagnetic link to transmit information back to the reader. So it pulls more or less power. And so you can have a situation where pulling low power means 0, high power means 1 or whatever. But Bill is going to talk a little bit more about that part of it.
Yeah, so I imagine most folks in the room have seen some variation of this diagram before. When we're sending information over the RF spectrum, it's going to happen at a certain frequency. And the frequencies that we're most concerned about for physical access control systems is low frequency, specifically 125 kilohertz. And that's what most of the legacy tags, like what you use to badge into your work with, is probably a 125 kilohertz. High frequency, which is usually 13.56 megahertz, is also common for that type of access control system. UHF, so in the 400 to 900 megahertz range, that is your longer range access tokens. So something like a garage door opener that works at a longer distance. And sometimes you see that happening in the infrared, so getting up to much higher frequencies close to visible light, stuff like TV remotes, some garage door openers as well. So those are the 4 frequencies that we tend to see in the physical access control space, and the flipper is capable of talking on all of them. The way that information gets sent over this frequency wave, so if we're sending binary digits over a simple wire, we can send it with 0s and 1s on the voltage. We can't put a direct current across empty space. The laws of physics don't allow us to do that. And the laws of the land, FCC in the US, Industry Canada in Canada, also restrict quite severely what we can put over an oscillating frequency wave. So we have a carrier wave here. It's oscillating in the case of 125 kilohertz, 125,000 times per second, but otherwise it's just a sine wave being sent over the air. To send 0s and 1s over it, we change that wave slightly. So that's modulation. This is probably a review for a lot of folks, by changing the frequency up and down a little bit, the amplitude up and down, and what many folks might not have heard of, but you see a lot in the RFID space, is what's called phase shift keying. You actually shift the phase of the wave to send 0s and 1s. So in this case, again, it's just like a barcode reader reading a barcode, except we're now sending 0s and 1s using the frequency, phase, or amplitude of this wave rather than light and dark bands on a barcode. So what do the 0s and 1s mean? In a physical access control system, the most common and still in use today, even 50 years since it was initially invented, is the 26-bit data format. So we have a parity bit at the front and the back, and that's just a checksum. And then we have 8 bits for the facility code, so 8 bits goes from 0 to 255, and 16 bits for the card number. And so that 3-byte piece of information corresponds to everything that's encoded in that card. So to simplify that a little bit, 0 to 255, 0 to 65,000, And the facility code tends to be unique to one building. So if I have an office, everyone that has access to that office will usually have the same facility code, and then it's their card number that will differentiate one user from the next. So we can flip over to the flipper itself. And we've got, so it's plugged into the computer. You're seeing on screen the same thing as what's on my flipper display. And I'll move through to 125 kilohertz RFID. And I can hit read. And so we've now detected both the technology that's in this card, EM4100. I've got facility code 194 and card number 14292. And so with the flipper, we're now able to read that card. We can go over and take what we've read and actually emulate it. So I'll hit emulate, and I can now hold it up to my demo door here. It beeps, and the door is open. Simple as that. And we'll talk in a few minutes about how we can clone with it as well. So this thing will read the binary that's being spat out, and again, it's just like screaming your name over and over again into a walkie-talkie. That's exactly what simple RFID cards do. So I'll skip past all my backup slides, and Ege will talk about how you can actually get this just by looking at a badge with your naked eye.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily always find ourselves in a situation where I can go up to someone, you know, in a penetration test job, or if I'm a threat actor, I can't necessarily just go up to someone and go like, oh, hey, can I borrow your badge for? No, that's obviously not going to happen, right? However, a lot of the times we don't actually have to do that. So if anyone has a badge with them right now from work or from whatever, you can actually check the badge, and a lot of them will have at least the card number and maybe even sometimes the facility code just printed on it. So in a situation like this, for example, when people have their badges hanging out and there's no printing on it, we can just take a good photo of it or take a good look at it. And we can even sometimes do this from outside the building with a zoom lens. So this is an example from a real facility where all the badges and the keys are just hanging out behind the security desk, and we were able to, from not even stepping foot on the building, with a zoom lens, take a good photo of it. All right, so now that we have a good photo of this badge, or maybe we wrote down the numbers, what do these numbers actually mean? So this long one over here, we don't actually have to worry about that. That's usually, well, you'll notice that that's too long to be the...
It's usually just the order number, so
yeah.
Corresponds to some paperwork in an office somewhere, nothing that we'll need to get into the door.
And the number that we have here, for example, the 18300, is the card number. And the 13 over here is a facility code. So if I was trying to duplicate this gray badge that we have here, or gray fob that we have here, I would have all the information I need. However, sometimes we don't know what the facility code is. So for example, in this example, we have card number 44430, but we have no idea what the facility code is. So let's remember the 26-bit data format. How many bits did we have for the facility code? Just 8. So that's a key space of a whopping 256. If anyone's familiar with this stuff, that is not a lot. And we can just brute force that very easily. We start with facility code 0, and then we start counting up. Worst case scenario, in 256 seconds, we know what the facility code is. Sometimes the number is not printed. So for example, if it's a custom ordered badge, or it's a custom printed badge, or sometimes we can't really get a good look at it, in cases like that, we can employ something like this. That you see on that photo there is a long-range reader that's designed for garage doors, but we can slightly repurpose it by putting it on a stand and plopping it next to an entrance or an exit at a hacker conference, maybe. All right, so now that we have that facility code and card number, how do we actually put it on a badge or use some sort of a device to emulate it. So we can use the Flipper Zero, like Bill just showed just now, to emulate the badge, or we can use it to write to a card if we get a reprogrammable card. It's really nice. It's standalone. It fits in the palm of your hand. And it's fairly customizable using custom firmwares or custom applications. But it is on the expensive side. This is $180. Well, at least it's expensive compared to the other options out there. And also, it's a small company producing them, so they're kind of constantly out of stock, unfortunately, and we'll get to the Canada part. If you're from Canada, you might not be able to get them soon. Next up, we have the Proxmark 3. This is more of a research tool. It needs to be connected to a computer to function. It's not a standalone tool. It gives you significantly more control, so you're not limited to what applications might be on there already. But it is, being a research tool, meant for the lab and not for the field, so it is a bit more delicate. Oh, and it's also cheaper. It's we sell them for $80, I think, right? Something like that. Next up, we have tools like this. So Keezy is an example. There are many more like it. It's basically a multiple-in-one key fob. So what I can do is I can do what Billy just showed, sniff a tag, emulate it, and then I can write it to my tag. But it doesn't always work, and if I want an actual tag, in this example, it can only write to its own tags. It can't write to generic ones. And you might see these on the internet. Please don't buy them. They're going to brick your tags. If you write to your tags with these, they will write protect them. These are the passwords, by the way, if you bricked your entire fleet of tags with them, but just don't use them. They're bad anyway, and they will write protect your tags. So now let's talk about if we know the facility codes and the card number. So for example, if we were issued credentials, how can we escalate that privilege? If I'm just a new hire at a company at an entry-level position, and I noticed that they were getting a new sysadmin who might have access to all sorts of places that a threat actor or a penetration tester might want to get access to. If I was hired and issued credentials, and my credential was facility code 100 and card number 1422, there's a really good chance that the person who was issued a credential after me is going to have card number 1423. And as you remember, the facility code is going to be the same. It's just going to be the same for a given facility. So what we can do is we can use a Flipper Zero or a device like it to emulate the card and try. So if we have 1422, 21, 23, 20, 24, and so on, and we are very likely to hit someone who was issued a credential near us who has more access than we do.
So you probably heard of all the other wonderful things that flippers can do as well. As I mentioned, we've just talked about 125 kilohertz so far. What can we do on these other frequencies? So something like your TV remote, which is usually IR, sometimes it's this. All of these ubiquitous LED strip lights that have this type of remote, that's what they're being used on is 433 megahertz. And many wireless burglar detection systems as well. The wireless communication actually happens on that 433 megahertz band, and the flipper can emulate that. So what we'll do, and we'll see, turn off emulation, pop back. Oh, we just lost signal. There we go.
We're back.
So we'll pop to sub-gigahertz. And I'll start by doing a frequency analyzer. And so this is listening live. And so if anyone's using remote controls in the room, this would pick up what frequency they're actually transmitting on. So there isn't nearly as much traffic as we thought there might be. So what this would pick up is different frequencies that it's detecting. So once we see that from the frequency analyzer, we can then narrow in on the one we're interested in and get a time graph of when the transmissions are happening. and we can actually replay those. So the flipper will record the exact bit stream that's being sent. We can replay them and emulate that way. You don't need a flipper for that, so Ege talked about some of the other tools for 125 kilohertz. There's things like this that you can buy for very cheap that will do the same thing, just a simple record and replay attack. For infrared remotes, the flipper does all the same things with recording and replaying. It also has some other fun capabilities, which is, if we pop over to infrared, universal remotes. So it has databases of all the remotes that are out there, and I can hit that. I'm going to stay far away from projectors, but air conditioners, that should be fairly safe. And it takes a moment to load that database. And now I'm not actually going to press anything because we all like the temperature in here right now. But if I did, it would start spamming out every known code for air conditioner remotes to turn it off, on, max, etc., and would be able to control these units like that. So as we talked about, Canada might ban the Flipper Zero, and their concern there is that they could be used to steal cars, which is a bit misguided.
So the claim that we see on the internet in a lot of places, these are screenshots from TikTok and LinkedIn, is people showing off how they have been able to successfully steal a car using a Flipper Zero. And unfortunately, the Canadian Minister of Innovation seems to have picked up on this. So here's the claim. You press the button, and it sends out a code, and your car hears that and unlocks it. However, evil me comes around with my Flipper Zero, and I also hear that code, and then I can retransmit that code and unlock the car. So fortunately, that is not how car remotes work. If we are talking about something low security, like for example, the LED strips that Billy talked about, where it's just, okay, so I would like this to turn on red at 100%. So that might have just a single code associated with it. I press the red on button, and it sends out, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And every single time I press the red on button, it sends out that same 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what I can do is I can come along with my flipper, listen in, and retransmit that to basically achieve the same result as the legitimate controller. So thankfully, car manufacturers have thought of this in the last couple of decades, and they use actual cryptography where no code is used for more than once. Basically, this is like a nonce that is encrypted with or signed with keys that only the legitimate key fob has. So that way, if I come along with my Flipper Zero and I record one of these keys, and then I try to go and use it again, the car is going to say, no, I heard this before, I'm not going to unlock. How thieves actually steal cars has more to do with the keyless unlock and keyless start technologies that we see available in cars. So you will have noticed, if you have a decently modern car, this is a technology that might be available. You just walk up to it, you might just open a door, or maybe press a button, or just even touch the door handle, and all your locks pop open. This is done with similar technologies to RFID, where there's a low power transmitter in the car that has a range of, like, say, 3 to 4 feet. And so that way, the transponder in the key fob can be detected. Well, if the transponder can be detected, then you are within 3 or 4 feet of your car door, and your car knows to unlock. What thieves can sometimes do is use repeaters on either ends. So for example, if you have your key left near your door, they'll go up to your door, put up a large antenna, and then that will transmit the information back and forth between the repeater that their partner is holding near the car, and they're kind of bridging that gap to increase the range of the keyless unlock system. And they can do the same thing to start the car and drive it away. Yeah, so that's how car thefts actually happen, and how you can defend against this is you can either not put your key next to your car door, next to your house door, so that way it won't be in the range of the second repeater. Or if you want, you can put it in a shielded bag, or just a metal box will do the same thing, and that's how you can defend against them. Not by banning the Flipper Zero, and you don't really even have to, threat actors don't really even have to know how to do the complicated radio stuff. They can just buy this off the internet. I've purposely not included the URL here. Please don't give them $5,300. I don't know if you'll get this, but you know. All right, so passing it off.
Yeah. So we've talked about how with most physical access control systems for buildings, it is very simplistic, screaming your name over and over again or your ID. And with cars, they very quickly moved away from that because there's such a high financial incentive to do so. Can we do the same for buildings? And we can. Unfortunately, the adoption of that is not nearly as widespread as it should be at this point. And we do that using NFC, which tends to operate on high frequency, so 13.56 megahertz. HID I-Class is an example. The Clipper cards here in the San Francisco area and many hotel key cards use this NFC protocol as well. So it's just near-field communication, so near-field because the two coils have to be close to one another. And the communication word says a lot more here because it is two-way back and forth communication. So again, this is generally on the high frequency range. And instead of being a simple screaming out your name just like reading a barcode, it is an actual challenge and response. So this is a very simplified example of the actual protocol, but to take HID I-Class, for example, it's a mutual challenge and response. The reader authenticates the card authenticates the reader, and then they can communicate encrypted using a shared private key.
So this seems like a strategy that it looks perfect, right? As long as you use a well-randomized key and make sure to never reuse that key between systems, this looks like, you know where I'm going, right? Heart of Darkness paper, you might have seen it. It turns out that HID I-Class standard security cards all use the exact same pre-shared key among every single product that they've ever sold. The authors of the paper did them a solid by not releasing, oh, what is going on with her presentation today? Okay. The authors of the paper did them a solid by not including the encryption keys in the paper that they released. The internet being the internet, it took not that long at all for the key to be for the key to end up on GitHub. Another example of how you can mess this up is the MyFair Classic card. And there the problem was they didn't include a strong enough random number generator. It didn't have a good enough seed. And the specific attacks are a little bit more complicated than the level of talk that we're going for right now. We wouldn't have time to go into a lot of depth. But they were also famously broken by some MIT hackers. And they gave themselves a lot of transit credit on their local transit card.
Yeah, so that was a big item in the news at the time. When doing that with the Flipper takes a relatively complicated technical attack and condenses it into a very simple menu of just reading the card, progress bar to show it cracking those keys, and implementing that poor random number generator attack. And then it can write to cards as well. So we talked about the Proxmark 3 before. For those who are interested in a little bit more behind the scenes, that will show you what's happening there. At least it would if the HDMI wouldn't keep crapping out on me. That will show you what's happening there. But the Flipper hides that all for you. And so one thing that the Flipper does do is take previously very difficult involved attacks and make them much easier to do. So the Clipper card, as I mentioned, is also NFC. It is one that was not a cracked algorithm. At least it has not yet been cracked. Passports and credit cards, thankfully, are similar. They use ISO 14443A, which has not yet, at least, been cracked. And so for defending against these types of problems, that is the first defense, is a technical defense. Oh my gosh. Let's try plugging that back in. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Sorry about that, folks. Technical difficulties. Right, looks like we're back. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Is using a protocol that has not been cracked yet and has been designed well. The other defenses you can apply is a more risk-based approach. So flippers have taken a long-standing threat and made it easier. These vulnerabilities have existed as long as they've existed. And what Flipper does, as I've mentioned, is made it easy and hidden behind a very nice UI. So from a risk perspective, the impact is unchanged. The probability increases significantly of this attack being used against you, and the skill level, so the type of threat actors that you're going to see taking advantage of these vulnerabilities, decreases significantly as well. And this gets into something that's important to understand about threat modeling in the physical space. With cyber, everyone is attacking everyone at once over the internet. With physical, the threat surface is only what is present physically. And so that has a lot of knock-on implications. So cyber's information limited. As soon as a 0-day is released, you now have the information to perform that attack, and everyone can do so anywhere in the globe over the internet. And the remediation tends to be fairly automatic for the end users at least. You patch your system, it's no longer vulnerable. Physical is force limited. The attacker must be present in person, so either a local attacker or a costly targeted attack. It's an unrestricted attack surface, and the remediation is costly and involved. You need to physically upgrade your facility to deal with that. The vectors are automatically discoverable with cyber. For physical, you need someone who's got at least a little bit of know-how, technical ability on that to be there in person. And so for that reason, security by obscurity may sometimes in certain cases be valid with physical where it is absolutely not for cyber. HID with the same common shared key for everything would be an example of not a good use case for that. But the attacks are manual and painstaking, and so the impact comes down to your response to the physical attack, because ultimately someone with sufficient skills, time, and force can get through any physical barrier whatsoever. So in the physical realm, there's a huge disconnect between what an attacker could in theory do and what an attacker is going to do. And what the flippers have done for the defenders is increase significantly the type of attacks that your average low-skilled attacker is actually going to try on your facility. So protection against everything is expensive, and implementing the technical solutions or the technical defenses can get quite expensive in the physical space. You can also move critical assets elsewhere, remove them entirely, and transfer of risk, so just getting insurance, is often more cost-effective. So there's the technical defenses and the risk-based mitigations, which is one thing that we want to drive home when people are talking about defending against these flippers. It's important to consider that your building that you're defending is not equal to your business. And so sometimes the correct decision is to take whatever business critical assets are being protected within that building and move them elsewhere. So if your maximum realizable threat capability, which is now higher with the flippers being released in terms of what attackers can do, if that's greater than your maximum acceptable risk, the correct risk-based decision is to move your critical assets elsewhere. When talking about technical defenses that you can apply, using an unbroken encrypted technology is the gold standard for technical defenses. BLE, which we haven't talked about too much, Flipper does have Bluetooth, but doesn't have a whole lot of BLE attacks just yet. A lot of BLE formats are unbroken and solid to use. A second factor as well, so biometrics or even standard metal keys. So when we're talking about protecting against auto theft, if you have a car that requires you to insert the key and turn it to start that car, 99% of theft rings out there are not going to target your make and model because it's much harder to deal with a physical key where they're cracking it open and doing the old school hot wiring as well as all of the technical radio replay attacks. Making sure you revoke credentials from departed employees, because we've seen how easy it is for them to record their own credential and then write a copy of it, which I don't think we actually demonstrated, so we'll do that at the end if we have time. Make a copy of it, play it again on their flipper, etc. And again, do privilege escalation to get to other employees. Rotating contractor fobs regularly is also important for that, because anyone could have a flipper, a contractor that's been through your site, could be collecting the fob that they use there and then coming back later. Use auditing and anomaly detection is something that we don't see nearly often enough in the physical access control space. And if you can avoid numbering your cards sequentially, that will also help prevent these privilege escalation attacks. And then, of course, halfway between technical defenses and risk-based is defense in depth. So a well-designed system will deny meaningful access even with physical access by having encryption and other cyber-based barriers as well. For the red teamers out there, and that's the perspective that we're coming at, how we use flippers on red team jobs when we're attacking facilities. So get a flipper, and you can use that to clone badges from a picture or manual inspection of a badge or a fob, clone by scanning the fob with the flipper yourself, which isn't actually terribly difficult to do in a crowded hallway. You just buzz it by someone who's got it on his waist. You can privilege escalate from there, or pretend to be a contractor and clone the contractor fob. And then any kind of 433 megahertz or sub-gigahertz wireless contact sensors, the flippers can replay. So you can jam those as well, which is not necessarily legal depending on your licensing. But the flipper can replay under the threshold, trigger a whole bunch of false alarms, and eventually alarm fatigue sets in, and you can then set off that alarm without responding appropriately to it. And then IR vehicle overhead doors as well are often a way into a facility, getting that overhead door up, and the flippers can crack those fairly quickly as well, or just sit by the door and listen for other people going in with their fobs, and then you can replay and crack that. So the high-level takeaways from this talk is RFID is like a barcode. The information is visible to anything that can talk on that frequency. The flipper is now one of those things. It is screaming out its information for everyone to listen. Duplicating it is not difficult. NFC is encrypted, but only protects if done well. And these tools are becoming cheaper and easier. So the flippers are consistently going down in price. Now is a great time to buy one, especially because the Flipper 1 there's rumors that it's going to be coming out next, so these might plummet as well in price. But that does also change your threat horizon as well. And you can go do this yourself. So we have this display and a bunch of others in the physical security sandbox right over there. Go try it out, and hopefully you've learned something from this talk. So thank you very much, and we'll take any questions. So for anyone who does have questions, we'll just ask you to come up to the central mic there, and we've got a few minutes left to try to answer those. As well, if you have your badges that you're interested in what the technology is, that's something that you probably don't want to do on the question and answer slide or section, but you're welcome to come talk to us afterwards, and we're happy to try to figure out what your badge is, what kind of technology's in there, what it'll take to copy. Okay, let's have that be our last AV issue for the day, and I'll just unplug that.
I had a quick question for you, or I can come up there.
Yes.
So I was clothing my badge at the Marriott the other day, my room key, and I noticed that it asked me to go up to the reader itself
Yes.
and do that. What was going on there?
So that is one of the, I believe it's one of the MyFair Classic attacks. Some of them have a bad random number generator that we were talking about, but some of them have that patched, and you have to attack it with the fundamental vulnerability of the protocol that they're implementing. And to be able to do that attack, you need to go to the reader and get some information from the reader too.
Yeah, so
It
it's
worked
sniffing the
great.
communication between the card and the reader.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Hi, could you explain again the frequency, the amplitude, and all that? Like, how does the flipper works on that?
Yeah, so the flipper is capable of communicating on all three, PSK, ASK, and FSK. And so I'm not going to try to pull the slide up, but to send a 1 on frequency shift keying, you slightly increase the frequency. So when we're talking at 125 kilohertz, you're going to go to like 125.05. And then you slightly decrease it for sending a 0. And so you're sending slightly different frequencies, which it can then pick up on. For amplitude, similar deal. You're changing the amplitude of the signal. And phase shift, you're actually shifting the waveform 180 degrees to send 0s and 1s.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah, just pull the mic closer.
Yeah, that's what the joys of being short. Is the what was the one? Oh, the ultralight C. Is that still considered secure, or has that been cracked?
The Ultralight C,
MyFair
I'm not... Oh, the MyFair Ultralight C.
Oh.
I'm not actually familiar. Yeah, I don't want to give you an answer because it might be completely
Yeah.
wrong.
I haven't seen any papers. If it's on the flipper, it's probably cracked.
It, for what it's worth, it wants passwords. So you have to put in a password.
Okay,
So
yeah.
It might still be secure unless you can get a hold of the passwords.
Yeah, and the other thing that the flipper has for a lot of protocols is there's often factory default keys that the flipper has in its memory, and many facilities don't bother to change those. For ones who do, it might be a secure protocol at that point.
Any other questions from anyone?
For the NFC cards that implement insecure protocols, can the readers be upgraded or patched with a firmware upgrade or something, or do they need to be replaced?
It depends on which type of vulnerability we're talking about. For a lot of the vulnerabilities out there, the vulnerability is inherent to the protocol that's being used. So you have to replace the entire system, unfortunately. But with the case for the MyFair Classic, for example, initially there was a pseudo-random number generator based, basically badly seeded randomizer based attack. And you could replace that, you could get around that by just replacing your cards and leaving in your costly readers. But then I think it was like less than a year later, they released another paper that this time made the entire protocol invalid. So it depends on the vulnerability. Most of the time, you have to replace the entire system.
Thank you.
So I had a question about the, like when you're fuzzing through all of the different facility codes, would you say in general most readers are going to lock you out after 4 or 5 attempts, or by default are they just going to let you do that?
So what happens with most physical access facilities is the reader is a dumb terminal, and it just sends the information up over the vegans protocol that's also got all kinds of problems with it to a central controller. And so the controller decides what to do in terms of brute force protection. In our experience, brute force protection is implemented woefully infrequently. So usually when we're doing that brute forcing, we're doing 5 to 2 per second. and then our limitation is just the human ability to see that the door solenoid is unlocked. It's often not implemented, but it can be. And so you can set your controller to have whatever setting you want there, except for some older ones that don't, because this is a very backwards industry. And if that is an option, you definitely want to set brute force protection, and even better, brute force alerting, right? Because it is much better to alert on someone's trying this sophisticated attack, get a guard over there and apprehend and find out what this threat actor is, than just locking them out, but then you don't know what you're up against.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Very well, if you think of anything else, feel free to come visit us at the Physical Security Sandbox over there. And thank you so much for coming to the talk.
Yeah.